The ocean breeze brushed over the terrace, carrying with it the scent of salt and expensive wine. Marbella was stunning, truly. The villa perched above the coast like a crown, all whitewashed stone and wide glass windows that opened to endless sea. Laughter echoed under the chandelier, glasses clinked, filet mignon sizzled on fine china, and not a single person at the table acknowledged who had made this all possible. That was fine. I didn't pay $47,000 to be thanked, but I also didn't pay it to be mocked. Aunt Colleen, in her oversized pearls and a glass of Grand Reserva in hand, stood with the flourish of someone who thought they were still in their prime. Her lips curled into a smile I recognized, mean, rehearsed, and sharpened with years of passive aggression. "Let's raise a glass," she said, swaying slightly. "To family. And to Royce, who, well, let's be honest, was always the family failure. Until we carried him." A round of light chuckles followed. Not laughter, because even they weren't sure what line she'd just crossed. My father, Malcolm, smirked into his glass. My mother, Sheila, didn't flinch. She just kept slicing into her fillet like she was sawing through old leather. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, but not from embarrassment. From clarity. There it was. The truth, right out in the open. Not whispered behind doors or slipped into smug glances, but laid bare, for everyone to hear. I stood slowly, my chair sliding back with a scrape against the stone tiles. All eyes turned. I took my glass, lifted it to my lips, then paused. "You know," I said, letting my voice settle into the silence like a blade, "it's funny. You're right, Aunt Colleen. I was the failure, wasn't I?" She blinked, her smile flickering. Didn't go to Ivy League. Didn't want to sit behind a desk in a suit trying to resurrect a dying company like Weston. Didn't open a boutique with coastal grandmother vibes that somehow never turned a profit. I glanced toward my sister Camille, who had the decency to look mildly uncomfortable. I went a different way. I got my hands dirty. I looked down at my wine, then back at the table. Literally. I built septic systems. Waste management. Sanitation. Not glamorous, right? They stared. But do you want to know something fun? I tapped my glass with my fork, the soft ring carrying farther than expected. Every bite you've had here. Every sip of that Bordeaux you're drinking. Every plane ticket, every car, every damn flower arrangement. Paid for by the business you used to snicker at. Paid for by the money I made, cleaning up the world's messes. The silence was absolute now. Even the sea seemed to hush. "You didn't carry me," I said, letting the words land with weight. "You just didn't notice when I stopped needing you." Colleen's face had gone pale beneath her tan. Malcolm still wore that smirk, but it had frozen into something tighter, smaller. Sheila finally looked up. But her expression remained unreadable. Of course, that was her gift. The polished shield of detachment. I took a breath and raised my glass one final time. "To family," I said, my voice calm now. "The kind that teaches you everything, mostly what not to be." Then I drank. The laughter didn't come back. Not from anyone. I placed my glass down, turned, and walked away from the table. The sliding doors closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time on this entire trip, I felt the weight in my chest begin to ease. They could keep their legacy, their empty titles, their fragile egos. I had something they'd never understand. Dignity. And the means to never sit at that kind of table again if I didn't want to. The morning sun leaked through the gauzy curtains of my villa suite, and I let it warm my skin as I stood shirtless on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the waves roll in like clockwork. The aftershock of last night's dinner still rippled under the surface, but I felt grounded, steady. For once, I'd said exactly what I meant, and no one had dared talk over me. Not even Malcolm. Not even Colleen. By late morning, I stepped into the main lounge where Weston sat nursing an espresso, his shirt unbuttoned a little too far, revealing the anxious sweat he probably thought he was hiding. He looked up and tried for a smirk. "Hell of a performance last night," he said, motioning toward the bar. "Want one?" "Too early," I replied, settling into the armchair across from him. "But don't let me stop you." He poured bourbon into his cup like it was creamer. "Look," Colleen was out of line. "You know she drinks too much. Always has. Don't pin that on the wine, Weston." That was all her. He didn't argue. Just sipped and watched me. "Legacy matters, Royce. We've been through things, this family, the name, the business. You can't just take one bad dinner and blow it all up." I chuckled. "One bad dinner? You think this started last night?" I leaned forward. "You want to talk legacy? Let's talk about yours. That last condo project of yours in Spokane? Lost what? 6 investors? 7? You buried the losses in shell companies and prayed no one asked questions. His smirk faded. That wasn't. And Camille, I went on, turning toward her as she wandered in from the terrace, sunglasses still on despite being indoors. Still pretending those silk wraps from Bali are exclusive? How's the boutique doing? Wait, I know Bleeding Money Monthly, because I've seen the reports. Camille paused mid-sip of her green smoothie, blinked behind her lenses, and then tried to wave it off. It's called brand growth. You wouldn't understand. No, I said evenly, it's called denial. She bristled, but Weston cut in. You think you're better than us now? Because you've got trucks and sludge and some cash flow? No, I said. I know I'm better than who you think I am. That's the difference. They weren't used to being challenged. Not by me. For years, I played the quiet one. The joke. They'd laugh at the idea of me fixing broken plumbing, elbow each other when I showed up to holidays still smelling faintly of motor oil. They never asked where the money came from. Never thought to ask how I went from a rusted-out pickup to owning one of the largest industrial sanitation companies in the Southwest. They were too busy clinging to the illusion that they were better, more polished, more worthy. Let me explain something, I said, standing slowly, pacing a little as they watched. The only reason this family is still living like royalty is because of me. You're not just riding the coattails of my generosity. You're surviving on them. Weston stiffened. That's not true. Really, I turned on him. Your firm's hanging on by a thread. Camille's boutique only exists because I silently absorbed the rent increases and paid for 2 of her suppliers. Colleen's second home in Santa Fe. Guess whose LLC is backing the mortgage? They were quiet now, faces blank, like mannequins just realizing they were hollow inside. You've all been pretending that I'm lucky to be tolerated, I said, letting the words land. But the truth is, without me, this illusion of success would have shattered years ago. Camille's lips pressed together in a straight line. You didn't have to do any of that. You're right, I said. I didn't. But I did it anyway, because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could earn your respect. Weston stood. You have it. No, I said, locking eyes with him. I had your dependence. That's not the same thing. He looked like he wanted to argue, to say something clever or cutting, but the words never came. He just looked down at his drink, then back at me, like he didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. Camille finally took off her sunglasses, her eyes glassy, maybe from the sun or maybe from something real for once. So what happens now, Royce? I shrugged. That's up to you. But if you're asking whether I'm going to keep funding your vanity projects and calling it love, no. That stops today. The weight of it hung in the air. For the first time in years, maybe ever, they had to see me, not as the family failure or the black sheep, but as the man who'd held the scaffolding of this family together while they played pretend. I turned to walk out, but stopped in the doorway. You want legacy? Build it yourselves. Then I left them in the silence they had earned. The morning sun leaked through the gauzy curtains of my villa suite, and I let it warm my skin as I stood shirtless on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the waves roll in like clockwork. The aftershock of last night's dinner still rippled under the surface, but I felt grounded, steady. For once, I'd said exactly what I meant, and no one had dared talk over me. Not even Malcolm, not even Colleen. By late morning, I stepped into the main lounge where Weston sat nursing an espresso, his shirt unbuttoned a little too far, revealing the anxious sweat he probably thought he was hiding. He looked up and tried for a smirk. Hell of a performance last night, he said, motioning toward the bar. Want one? Too early, I replied, settling into the armchair across from him. But don't let me stop you. He poured bourbon into his cup like it was creamer. Look, Colleen was out of line. You know she drinks too much. Always has. Don't pin that on the wine, Weston. That was all her. He didn't argue. Just sipped and watched me. Legacy matters, Royce. We've been through things, this family, the name, the business. You can't just take one bad dinner and blow it all up. I chuckled. One bad dinner? You think this started last night? I leaned forward. You want to talk legacy? Let's talk about yours. That last condo project of yours in Spokane? Lost what? 6 investors? 7? You buried the losses in shell companies and prayed no one asked questions. His smirk faded. That wasn't. And Camille, I went on, turning toward her as she wandered in from the terrace, sunglasses still on despite being indoors. Still pretending those silk wraps from Bali are exclusive? How's the boutique doing? Wait, I know Bleeding Money Monthly, because I've seen the reports. Camille paused mid-sip of her green smoothie, blinked behind her lenses, and then tried to wave it off. It's called brand growth. You wouldn't understand. No, I said evenly, it's called denial. She bristled, but Weston cut in. You think you're better than us now? Because you've got trucks and sludge and some cash flow? No, I said. I know I'm better than who you think I am. That's the difference. They weren't used to being challenged. Not by me. For years, I played the quiet one. The joke. They'd laugh at the idea of me fixing broken plumbing, elbow each other when I showed up to holidays still smelling faintly of motor oil. They never asked where the money came from. Never thought to ask how I went from a rusted-out pickup to owning one of the largest industrial sanitation companies in the Southwest. They were too busy clinging to the illusion that they were better, more polished, more worthy. Let me explain something, I said, standing slowly, pacing a little as they watched. The only reason this family is still living like royalty is because of me. You're not just riding the coattails of my generosity, you're surviving on them. Weston stiffened. That's not true. Really? I turned on him. Your firm's hanging on by a thread. Camille's boutique only exists because I silently absorbed the rent increases and paid for 2 of her suppliers. Colleen's second home in Santa Fe? Guess whose LLC is backing the mortgage? They were quiet now. Faces blank, like mannequins just realizing they were hollow inside. You've all been pretending that I'm lucky to be tolerated, I said, letting the words land. But the truth is, without me, this illusion of success would have shattered years ago. Camille's lips pressed together in a straight line. You didn't have to do any of that. You're right, I said. I didn't. But I did it anyway, because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could earn your respect. Weston stood. You have it. No, I said, locking eyes with him. I had your dependence. That's not the same thing. He looked like he wanted to argue, to say something clever or cutting, but the words never came. He just looked down at his drink, then back at me, like he didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. Camille finally took off her sunglasses, her eyes glassy, maybe from the sun or maybe from something real for once. So what happens now, Royce? I shrugged. That's up to you. But if you're asking whether I'm going to keep funding your vanity projects and calling it love, no. That stops today. The weight of it hung in the air. For the first time in years, maybe ever, they had to see me, not as the family failure or the black sheep, but as the man who'd held the scaffolding of this family together while they played pretend. I turned to walk out, but stopped in the doorway. You want legacy? Build it yourselves. Then I left them in the silence they had earned. The sky above Marbella was pristine, a cloudless stretch of azure so perfect it almost mocked the tension beneath it. The villa's marble floors echoed with every footstep, but the conversations had dwindled to a trickle, hushed, awkward, stilted. Last night's confrontation had cracked something wide open, and no one quite knew how to seal it back shut. I didn't mind. In fact, I welcomed it. It was the first time in years I wasn't pretending. The family clung to their usual buzzwords like they were lifeboats. Tradition, influence, reputation. Each one flung like a shield in casual conversation. Camille, in her breezy linen caftan, sipped chilled water on the terrace and spoke vaguely about honoring the family's roots, while scrolling through her boutique's Instagram on a cracked phone. Weston was holed up in the study with spreadsheets open and a phone glued to his ear, pitching something that reeked of desperation. And Colleen acted like none of it had happened. She laughed too loudly, poured her wine too freely, and avoided eye contact like it might burn her. But the illusions didn't work on me anymore. They hadn't for a long time. I walked through the villa's open kitchen, grabbing a cold bottle of water and nodding at the staff who still looked uncomfortable around me. No doubt the family had spun some tale about my outburst, twisting my truth into drama, the way they always did. But I wasn't here to make them feel better. I wasn't here to save face or stitch up the pretty mask they wore for the world. I was here, for once, entirely as myself. In the lounge, Sheila perched on the velvet settee like royalty, flipping through an old interior design magazine as if we were in 2006. She didn't look up as I passed. Didn't speak. It was her move, silence is power. But it didn't bother me. Her disapproval used a sting. Now it felt like background noise. Irrelevant. I stepped outside, the heat warm on my skin, and found Weston storming down the stone path from the upper guest house, his phone still pressed to his ear. I said I'll circle back with updated numbers, he snapped. No, you're not listening. Just give me until Friday. He ended the call and saw me. His face tightened. Your stunt last night? That could have cost me real investors. I leaned against the patio railing. If your entire pitch crumbles because your brother told the truth, Maybe it wasn't a strong pitch. He advanced a step. You don't get it. Our name means something. People expect a certain stature. No, I said coolly. They expect results. Your name doesn't guarantee anything anymore, Weston. You keep talking about legacy like it's some sacred scroll, but it's just smoke now. Reputation doesn't put roofs on buildings. Influence doesn't pay contractors. Money does. And I'm the only one here making any. He flushed, whether from shame or heat or both. You think money's everything? No, I said. But pretending it doesn't matter while secretly relying on mine? That's cowardice. He stared at me for a beat, jaw tight, eyes blazing with the weight of truth he didn't want to carry. Then he muttered something under his breath and stalked off, fist clenched. I watched him go, a flicker of pity crossing my chest before vanishing. Weston had always believed he was the heir to something great. But he'd inherited a house of cards, and I had stopped trying to hold it up. Inside, the living room was silent. Camille had turned off the music. Colleen wasn't pouring wine. Sheila was still, finally still, staring out the window. The entire villa felt like it had lost oxygen. I walked slowly toward the wide bay of windows that overlooked the pool and the sea beyond it. Their reflections hovered around me, blurred, fragile outlines of people who once seemed larger than life. Now they looked small, huddled behind legacy and lace, clutching pearls and memories of status that didn't exist anymore. I'm done pretending, I said, not turning around. Done letting you pretend too. No one answered, but their silence spoke louder than words. Camille fiddled with a napkin. Weston's footsteps receded upstairs. Colleen's laugh didn't come. Sheila exhaled. And I walked out. Out through the villa doors, down the steps toward the beach, where the waves didn't care about last names or inheritance or who paid for what. The truth had landed, and they'd felt it, deep in the bones of the life they'd built on my back. Let it crumble, because I wasn't their foundation anymore. The villa finally quieted down. For 2 whole days, the tension dulled into something bearable. No veiled japs. No hushed arguments bleeding from behind closed doors. Just the hum of distant waves and the soft clink of breakfast dishes brought out to the sun-warmed terrace. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to simply breathe. Not perform. Not defend. Not provide. Just exist. I woke early both mornings, before the rest of the house stirred. I brewed my own coffee, ignoring the staff's polite offer to help, and carried the steaming mug to the edge of the balcony where the Mediterranean stretched out like a living, breathing canvas. The sun rose slow, golden fingers painting the sea, and I stood there with nothing but the quiet in my chest. It wasn't something I was used to, but I was beginning to crave it. I swam alone in the afternoons, diving into the cool water with the kind of freedom I hadn't known since I was a boy. I didn't have to worry about Wesley and Company, estates, or Camille's failed launches, or Colleen's humiliating commentary. I didn't have to answer to my father's disapproving stare or Sheila's weaponized indifference. They gave me space, but not because they respected me. No, it was more likely they didn't know how to face me after I tore the family illusion in two. That suited me fine. The villa, for all its expense, finally felt like mine. I took long walks down the sand at sunset, ate what I wanted, when I wanted, drank a dark Syrah without hearing some backhanded comparison to Weston's preferred French label. I even pulled out a novel I hadn't touched in years and read a few chapters under a swaying palm tree. For 2 brief days, I wasn't the family failure. I was just Royce. But peace doesn't last, not in this family. On the 3rd night, I returned from a beach run just before dinner. The sky was lavender and pink, streaked with the last blush of sun. I toweled off, pulled on a fresh t-shirt, and stepped into the lounge to find Malcolm waiting for me. He was alone, perched in a leather armchair near the built-in bar, a half-empty glass of bourbon in his hand. His expression was tired, but not cruel. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. "Sit," he said quietly, motioning to the chair opposite him. I hesitated, then lowered myself into the seat, stretching my legs. "Didn't expect to see you alone. Didn't expect to be," he admitted, swirling the glass in his hand. "But here we are." I didn't speak. I let him take his time. "Wesley and Company is in trouble," he finally said, voice low, eyes fixed on the dark liquid in his glass. "More than trouble, really. We've lost 2 key investors. That Seattle waterfront project Weston bragged about fell through. The zoning fell apart. The banks pulled out. There's lawsuits on the horizon." I watched him, waiting. "I'll be honest, Royce," he said, glancing at me finally. "We're drowning. Weston doesn't know how to stay afloat. He never had to. He was raised to think the current would carry him. I tilted my head. And Camille. Her boutique's been using family credit lines for months. Quietly. Sheila doesn't even know how far it's gone. I let that sink in. And now, he continued, setting the glass down carefully on the end table, we're looking at selling property, historic family land back home. It's desperate. He looked older in that moment, smaller. And for the first time in years, I saw something close to honesty behind his eyes. He wasn't coming to lecture me. He wasn't here to posture. He was here to ask. We need help, he said. Not just money, but direction, guidance, stability. You built something real, Royce. I see that now. I might have mocked it once, but Titan is strong. You know how to survive in a market like this. You could help us get through this. Weston can't do it alone. I can't either. There it was. Not the apology I deserved, but a plea all the same. For rescue. For salvation. From the son who'd been laughed at, dismissed, ignored. And now he wanted my hand to pull them back to shore. I sat back in the chair, studying him. The lines around his mouth were deeper. The bravado, the stiff-necked pride, it had cracked. But still, there was something hollow about it. Like he regretted the consequences more than the actions. Like he missed the empire more than the son. You're asking the son you never believed in to save the family legacy? I asked, voice steady. He didn't flinch. Yes. I nodded slowly, my chest still. I didn't give him an answer, not yet. I didn't owe him one on the spot. But the power dynamic had shifted, and we both knew it. For the first time, he wasn't the father holding all the cards. And I wasn't the boy begging to play. The air felt different that morning, thicker somehow, as if the walls of the villa knew what was coming. I took my time with breakfast, slicing into a ripe mango and sipping the strongest black coffee I could make, letting the bitterness settle in my mouth while the sun crept higher over the coast. The marble floors beneath my bare feet felt cool and grounding. I wasn't in a rush. I wanted to savor the quiet before I broke the last thread holding this facade together. Malcolm found me on the rear patio, where I'd positioned myself with a view of the sea and a strategic angle that let me see his approach through the glass. He was dressed sharply, of course, slacks, polished loafers, a pale blue shirt buttoned all the way up. As if professionalism might somehow sweeten the bitter thing he was about to swallow. He stood there for a second before I looked up, silently granting him permission to speak. I'm following up on our conversation, he said. No greeting, no preamble. About Wesley and Company. I remember, I replied, not moving from my chair. I didn't forget overnight. His jaw tensed, but he kept his tone measured. We need you, Royce. I'm not going to dance around it. The company is in freefall. Weston's overwhelmed. He's trying, trying. I scoffed, finally setting my coffee down and turning fully to face him. You mean calling the same old investors, pushing the same tired developments, pretending his name still opens doors? Malcolm's mouth flattened, but he didn't deny it. He's not a builder, Dad. He's a pretender. And he's always had someone to clean up after him. This is about family, Malcolm said, stepping closer. It's not just about Weston. It's Camille too. It's the family name, the company, the legacy. Legacy, I echoed, rolling the word around like a sour candy. That again. Yes, he said sharply. It matters. To us, to the community, to your grandfather's memory. Wesley and Company built neighborhoods, schools, business parks. We created something real. And now it's rotting, I said. Because you refused to evolve. Because you clung to the name like it was currency and assumed someone else would foot the bill. He bristled. We didn't ask. You didn't have to ask, I snapped, rising to my feet. I've been paying for this family's comfort for years. Quietly. Without acknowledgement. Without thanks. I carried you without ever being counted. We thought you were doing well, Malcolm said, his voice rising. We didn't realize how much. No, I cut in. You didn't care. Until now. Until the money mattered. He looked away, lips pressed thin. The sea behind him shimmered, bright and disinterested. I let the silence stretch between us, feeling the weight of years settle into my spine. Every dismissal, every slight, every moment I'd been made to feel less than because I chose a trade over a title. Then, I stepped closer. Not aggressive, just clear. You called me ungrateful, I said, my voice low. For standing up for myself. For reminding this family who paid for their wine and plane tickets. Malcolm's face twitched. I'm not ungrateful, I continued. I'm just finally putting myself first. I built something. With my hands. With late nights and busted pipes and contracts no one wanted to touch. I got my boots muddy and my name dragged. And while Weston was playing at CEO and Camille was posting flat-lay photos of imported scarves, I was building a company that actually worked. He exhaled, slow. So that's it? You're really saying no? I held his gaze. No money. No favors. Not this time. There it was, the moment of clarity. He didn't explode. He didn't beg again. He simply nodded once, the movement tight and reluctant, like swallowing a pill without water. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was looking at a man who understood he'd lost something he couldn't rebuild. You'll regret this, he said, almost softly. One day. I smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was free. No, I won't. Then I stepped back and turned toward the stairs, leaving him standing there with his polished shoes and undone pride. The balance had shifted. He felt it. I felt it. For years, I'd given them the benefit of the doubt. Let them believe the story they told themselves about who mattered, who didn't, who was worth listening to. But not anymore. Today, I refused to be their safety net. Today, I chose myself. And it felt damn good. The morning was deceptively calm. A soft breeze tugged at the sheer curtains drifting from the terrace doors, and the scent of salt clung to the air. I stood by the railing, arms crossed, watching the horizon blur into sunlight. My peace was deliberate now, no longer something I stumbled into, but something I protected like armor. But of course, I knew it couldn't last. Not with her still in the house. Sheila. She appeared just after sunrise, gliding onto the terrace as though nothing in the world had shifted. She wore white linen and a faint expression of indifference, holding a porcelain cup of green tea between two perfectly manicured fingers. Her presence alone changed the temperature of the space, cool, sharp, composed. Always composed. She sat across from me without asking. That was her way. Silent dominance disguised as elegance. I didn't speak. I sipped my coffee and kept my gaze fixed on the sea. I thought you might be out here, she said finally, her voice calm, clipped, measured. Of course you did, I thought. You've always watched from the corners. I like the quiet, I said, not looking at her. It's a beautiful villa, she continued. A bit excessive, perhaps. But impressive. It should be, I replied. I paid for every square inch. Her lips curled into something faintly resembling a smile, but not quite. Yes, we're all aware now. Silence fell between us again. She sipped her tea, pinky extended just slightly. She wasn't rattled. Not like the others. She never showed her panic, not even when it strangled her beneath layers of restraint. No, her control came with a delicate blade. I spoke to your father, she said after a moment. He told me how things ended yesterday. I doubt he called it the end, I muttered. Sheila set her cup down on the side table with gentle precision, then folded her hands in her lap. Royce, she began, I know you feel cast out. I understand how things must have seemed. You don't, I said, turning to face her now. You understand appearances. You understand how things look, not how they feel. Her brows lifted slightly, the only sign of irritation. I'm your mother. You're a woman who watched, I said, my voice tightening. You watched them dismiss me, diminish me, mock me. And you did nothing. You stayed neutral, polite, always polished, always silent. She stiffened. I protected this family in the only ways I knew how. No, I said. You preserved the illusion. Her jaw clenched just briefly. We needed unity. Weston's firm. Weston's firm is a relic, I cut in. Camille's boutique is a vanity project. And the only reason any of you are still upright is because I let you lean on me. She didn't argue. She just sat there, her gaze flicking across my face like she was cataloging weaknesses. This isn't about money, she said softly, finally shifting tactics. This is about Weston's kids. About Camille's dignity. About what happens if the family name collapses in on itself. You may have chosen your own path, Royce, but there's still your blood. Blood that only runs toward me when it's thirsty, I replied. Funny how no one remembered I was family when they were laughing at me over oysters. She sighed. You're still young. I barked a short laugh. That again. I'm 39. I own a multi-state operation. I employ over 200 people. I've built an empire cleaning up everyone else's messes. And now, I'm cleaning up my own. She reached for her tea again, calm as ever. You're angry. I understand. But resentment doesn't build legacies. Compassion does. Sacrifice does. Then sacrifice your control, I said. Open your own wallet. Sell your antique collection. Liquidate something for once instead of asking me to. She flinched at that, though it was subtle. Her knuckles whitened around the cup. You have every right to be upset, she said after a long pause. But think of the bigger picture. The Wesley name. No, I said, standing slowly, letting the legs of my chair scrape the stone. You don't get to hang that name over me anymore. It's not a badge. It's a burden. You want someone to clean this up for you. She blinked. I leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. Hire a professional. Sanitation pays well. Her lips parted just slightly, and for a flicker of a second, something cracked. I saw it in her eyes. The hint of panic. The realization that the son she underestimated had become the man who could afford to walk away. I turned and stepped back toward the villa, the breeze catching my shirt, the sea roaring quietly behind me. Sheila didn't call after me. She just sat there, sipping her tea that had long since gone cold. Back in Austin, the buzz of city life wrapped around me like an old coat, worn, familiar, a little frayed in places, but mine. The skyline stretched beyond my office windows, the jagged peaks of glass and steel catching the morning light. Titan Waste Solutions occupied the top floors of a sleek black building downtown, a monument to everything I'd built with my own two hands. Trucks lined up before dawn at our yards, crews dispatched to job sites across 3 states, and contracts rolled in like clockwork. It ran like a machine because I made it that way. But even machines can catch fire when someone tosses in the right kind of trash. I was sitting in the conference room going over our quarterly procurement report when Cassandra, my assistant, knocked lightly and peeked in. "You've got a call from Frank Ramirez," she said. "Says it's urgent." Frank was old school. Industrial contracting veteran. Not the kind of guy who used the word urgent unless something had teeth. "Put him through," I said, nodding toward the speakerphone. The line clicked, and Frank's voice came through rough and tight. "Royce, I'm just gonna say it. Someone's talking." "Talking?" I leaned forward, confused. "Yeah, I heard it from a city official over in El Paso. Said there's whispers about Titan, stuff about your contracts not being clean, that you're running under-the-table deals, inflating invoices. All anonymous, of course. But it's spreading." I sat back slowly, eyes narrowing. "That's a lie. I know that. But lies don't need legs when they've got wings. This is spreading fast." He gave me a few names, clients we were about to close, contacts I'd cultivated for years. One by one, they were starting to pull back. Not because of facts, but because of fear. "Any idea where it's coming from?" I asked, even though I already felt the answer forming like a bitter taste in my mouth. Frank hesitated. "I don't like to speculate. But when someone's targeting your rep this directly, it's usually personal." The call ended soon after, but the pressure in my chest didn't. I sat in the stillness of the office, watching the city move far below, cars like ants weaving through the arteries of my empire. My empire. Built from nothing. Built the hard way. No shortcuts. No sleaze. And now, someone was trying to drag my name through the mud I'd spent a lifetime clearing away. I didn't need a bloodhound to sniff this one out. That family. Of course it was them. The timeline was too clean. The backlash too specific. The target too precise. A few weeks ago, I had pulled the rug out from under their fragile egos in front of everyone. Refused to fund Weston's flailing firm. Shut down Malcolm. Outmaneuvered Sheila. And now the game had changed. They were losing, and they couldn't take it. So they did what all desperate people do. They got dirty. Except I know dirty. I make a living off of it. By noon, I had my head of legal on the phone. By 2, we were tracking every whisper, every post on anonymous message boards, every sudden shift in client behavior. Cassandra gathered our PR team for a briefing, and by 3 I had statements ready. We moved fast because I built this company to withstand storms. But still, it rattled me. I walked the hallways of Titan, floor by floor, hands in my pockets, nodding to familiar faces. Everyone here knew my story. From the first rusted truck to this gleaming tower. They didn't believe the lies, but I could see the worry in their eyes. That stung more than the rumors themselves. That my family would put them in jeopardy just to knock me down a peg. I stepped into my private office and closed the door behind me. The silence pressed in. I looked around, photos of job sites, blueprints framed on the wall, a shovel from our first groundbreaking hanging behind my desk. Proof of the grind. Proof of the years. My phone buzzed. A message from an old college friend who now sat on the city council. Heard something about Titan being investigated. Want me to check into it? And there it was. The seed planted. No matter how ridiculous the lie, once it hits the right ears, it grows. I texted back, yes, and find out who's watering it. My gut told me it was Weston. His desperation had reached new depths. But this had the fine, manicured fingerprints of Sheila all over it. She didn't make threats. She didn't throw punches. She planted stories. She smiled while she pulled strings, letting other people deliver the damage so she could claim innocence. This wasn't just revenge. It was preservation. They knew the moment I said no on that terrace, the moment I turned my back on the legacy, that I was out of their control. And people like them don't just let go. They try to poison the well. But they'd forgotten something. I'm not in the business of reputation. I'm in the business of waste. I know how to handle garbage. I know how to trace a stench back to its source, how to clean up what others can't even look at. I didn't spend 2 decades in this industry without learning how to deal with messes, even if this one had my family's name written all over it. By the end of the day, I had already taken steps to counter every whisper. Legal drafted cease and desist letters. We pulled audit records to prove our contracts were clean. I recorded a personal video message for stakeholders, detailing our growth, our compliance certifications, and our latest wins. No spin, just facts. Because that's the difference between me and them. They built stories. I built substance. They spun lies. I built pipelines and plants and payrolls. So let them try to smear me. Let them crawl through the dirt I mastered. Let them throw rumors like stones, hoping one might land. They forgot, trash doesn't scare me. It's where I started. And now, I'd show them exactly how I finish. The invitation came in glossy white and gold, delivered by courier like they thought I'd be flattered. The Wesley Family Foundation cordially invites you to a charity gala benefiting urban revitalization in the Seattle metro area. I read it twice before setting it down and laughing dry, bitter, but entertained all the same. A gala. Of course. They were doing exactly what they always did, dressing up the wreckage in pearls and pretending it glittered. It wasn't about revitalization. It was about survival. After the fallout in Marbella and the rumors swirling through my industry like flies around spoiled meat, the Wesleys needed a lifeline. And they were throwing a party to bait one. I almost didn't go. Almost. But something in me stirred at the thought of watching them perform. Seeing Colleen work the room with her too bright smile, Weston posing with investors like his company wasn't gasping for air. Sheila sweeping through the crowd in a tailored gown with a champagne flute and her razor-sharp grace. No, I wasn't just going. I was going to end the show. Seattle was damp when I landed, a cold drizzle misting the runway as my driver pulled up in a sleek black SUV. I spent the day working from my hotel suite, checking contracts and monitoring Titan's PR team as they cleaned up the last of the fallout. The smear campaign hadn't held. Our numbers were stable, morale was steady, and we were already securing new contracts, larger than before. Still, this gala? It was the stage I'd been waiting for. That night, I stepped out in a tailored charcoal suit that cut sharp across the shoulders and narrowed perfectly at the waist. The tie? Deep navy. Shoes polished. Not flashy. Just solid. Like everything I built. When I entered the venue, some upscale converted art museum with floor-to-ceiling windows and jazz humming low in the background, the crowd didn't part, but they noticed. Heads turned. Not all at once, but subtly. People who used to ignore me glanced up. A few smiled too quickly. 1 or 2 whispered. Let them. I moved through the space like I belonged, because I did. More than most of them. Camille caught sight of me near the silent auction tables. Her eyes widened. Royce. Evening, I said with a slight nod, watching her fumble for composure. You got the invitation? Hard to miss it, I replied. She glanced around nervously, probably calculating how soon she could disappear. I let her go. I found my place by the bar, casually sipping bourbon and observing. Weston was in the corner near a hedge wall photo backdrop, talking to a small cluster of gray-suited men, his grin brittle and too wide. Malcolm stood nearby, arms crossed, barely engaging. And Colleen? She was center stage, microphone in hand, preparing to speak. The lights dimmed just slightly as she tapped the mic. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to celebrate community, connection, and the legacy of the Wesley name. I tuned her out after that. Legacy. Family values. Integrity. I could script it myself. She droned on, weaving fiction like it was silk, until the last line hit the room like a rehearsed finale. And in the spirit of that legacy, Wesley and Company is thrilled to announce a renewed commitment to development across the Pacific Northwest. Working with both old partners and new. That was my cue. I moved toward the edge of the crowd, not climbing onto the stage, but loud enough to command the room. Speaking of new partnerships. The mic went dead for a second as heads turned. I'd like to make an announcement, I said, voice calm but clear. Titan Waste Solutions has just secured a national municipal contract, servicing urban infrastructure across 15 cities, including Seattle. A beat of stunned silence. Then applause. Real, booming applause from people who knew what that meant. Heads of logistics firms, city planners, construction leaders, the ones who understood the scale of what I just dropped. Colleen stood frozen. Weston's face drained of color. Sheila didn't move. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I let the momentum carry itself. Conversations erupted. Investors swarmed me, people who'd avoided me a year ago now trying to hand me business cards, asking for a meeting, congratulating me. I accepted every handshake with calm, deliberate poise. Wesley and company didn't just get upstaged. They got erased. By the end of the night, I'd spoken with more potential partners than I had all quarter. The whispers were no longer about shady rumors. They were about growth, power, position. Colleen tried to corner me near the dessert table, mask slipping. That was inappropriate, she hissed. No, I said, taking a sip of champagne. That was business. And for the first time, I saw something behind her eyes that looked like fear. Not of me, of what I'd become. Someone they couldn't ignore anymore. The late afternoon sun filtered through the glass walls of my office, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floor. I stood behind my desk, reviewing contract proposals for a new waste treatment facility outside of Denver, when Cassandra buzzed through. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. "It's your father." I looked up from the documents, letting her words settle. I hadn't heard from Malcolm in nearly a year, not since the gala, where I'd outmaneuvered the entire family in front of their investors. I hadn't expected to. That night had marked a turning point, a public shift in power they couldn't undo. But now, out of nowhere, he was standing in the lobby of my building like any other desperate man trying to get a meeting. "Send him up," I said, my voice flat. 2 minutes later, the door opened, and there he was, Malcolm Wesley. The man who had once loomed so large in my mind looked smaller. His hair was grayer, his frame thinner, suit hanging looser than it used to. But more than that, it was the way he moved, slightly hunched, as though years of pride and denial had finally collapsed inward. "Royce," he said with a faint nod, stepping inside. "Take a seat," I offered, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. I remained standing. He eased into the chair slowly, as though even that was a concession. The silence stretched between us for a few seconds before he finally broke it. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your time," he began, voice low, rough around the edges. "But I'm here because I don't know where else to go." I raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a statement coming from you." He nodded. "I's not quite meeting mine. Wesley and Company is folding." I said nothing. He continued. "The last few developments collapsed. Weston took out loans he couldn't cover. Camille defaulted on her credit lines. The house in Medina's gone. Colleen moved back to Albuquerque. Sheila won't return my calls." He ran a hand over his face. "Everything's gone, Royce. The company, the properties, the investors, the name." I sat down slowly, steepling my fingers in front of me. "And now you're here." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Weston's overwhelmed. He's not built for this. Camille's too deep in debt. And he paused. "I've made a mess I can't clean up. And you want me to fix it?" I said. "I want to ask for your help," he replied softly. "Not as the man who failed you, but as a father asking his son." I stared at him, unmoving. His words might have carried more weight if they hadn't arrived so late. After all the damage, all the years of silence and scorn, all the times I'd been mocked or dismissed at the very tables they now no longer owned. "You said I wasn't one of you," I said, my voice even. "You said it without words. Every time you called Weston the future, every time you looked through me like I was a shadow at your dinner parties. And now you want me to save the legacy that excluded me." Malcolm looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. I was wrong. I almost believed it. But regret isn't redemption. Regret is just an echo. It doesn't fix the damage. It just reminds you of it. I stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, looking out at the city I had helped build in my own way. Skyscrapers, neighborhoods, commercial blocks, all connected by the unglamorous, unseen infrastructure Titan maintained. Everything they'd overlooked. Everything I'd turned into an empire. When I turned back around, Malcolm was still there, waiting. "I'm not giving you money," I said calmly. "I'm not absorbing your debt. I'm not buying your name out of disgrace." His lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. "You made your choices," I continued. You gambled on illusion. I built reality. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. I nodded once. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Still, it didn't change what I needed to do. I walked over to the door and opened it. He stood slowly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. I built something real, I said, holding the door for him. And I did it without any of you. Malcolm met my eyes, defeated. Goodbye, Royce. Goodbye, Dad. I watched him walk down the hall, his shoulders heavy, his steps slow. And I felt no guilt, no anger, just clarity. I wasn't the boy who once begged for a seat at their table. I was the man who built his own. It was a crisp, cloudless morning in Austin when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. The house, set back on 5 acres just outside the city, wasn't exactly easy to reach without intention. I'd built it that way on purpose. Private. Controlled. Untouched by old ghosts. But the moment I saw her standing on my doorstep, dressed in her usual elegance, ivory coat, pale lipstick, pearls that looked as if they'd been passed down for generations, I knew. Sheila. My mother. She held her clutch like a shield and offered a faint smile, as if this was any other casual visit, as if we weren't standing on the other side of a chasm created by years of silence, manipulation, and finely threaded cruelty. May I come in? She asked. I studied her for a moment. The woman who had sat silent through every belittling comment, every dismissal. The one who had always acted above it all, neutral, untouchable, until neutrality no longer served her. I should have said no. But some part of me, call it curiosity, call it closure, stepped aside and held the door open. She entered with the grace of someone raised to glide through life untouched. She paused in the foyer, eyes sweeping over the space. Warm oak floors. Clean modern lines. A house that reflected everything she never imagined I'd build. Her lips tightened slightly, as if admitting that, even silently, wounded her. We moved into the kitchen, and I motioned to the bar stools at the island. She sat. I stood. I came to talk, she said, folding her hands. One last time. I nodded. Then talk. Her eyes met mine, sharper than I remembered. They're suffering, Royce. Weston's children, they've had to switch schools. Camille's facing bankruptcy. Malcolm is trying to salvage what's left of the properties, but he can't even afford the legal team. And you? I asked. Are you suffering? She blinked, then smiled thinly. I'm not here to play games. I came to ask, no, to beg, you to think of the family. Think of the future. We may have made mistakes. But this silence, this distance, it's cruel. I let the word hang there. Cruel. You think this is cruel? I asked. After everything? After being mocked at that dinner table? After funding your lavish trips, your renovations, your lifestyle, without thanks, without recognition? After watching you all use me, then try to ruin me when I wouldn't play along. Her expression didn't crack. We were scared. When people are desperate, they lash out. That's not justification. It's just truth. I studied her, wondering if she believed that. If, in her own way, she convinced herself that desperation excused betrayal. She leaned forward slightly. You may not care about Weston or Camille. But what about the children? What about the name? The legacy you're so eager to discard? That was it. Her last card. Guilt. I laughed once, sharp. Legacy? You think I want what you have? She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You said it yourself once. I'd never have what you all had. The name. The respect. The reputation. And you were right. I stepped around the island, closer now, forcing her to look up at me. But what I built, it's real. It feeds families. It pays wages. It doesn't pretend to be more than it is. Your world, was built on fiction. Mine was built on grit. She straightened her shoulders, still trying to hold her position, still trying to look like the matriarch. But even she could feel the final shift. Do you know what I see now? I said. I see people who thought money would always come. Who thought legacy meant never having to earn anything. And now that it's gone, you come crawling back, not to apologize, not to repair, but to use me again. The difference is, I know better now. Her voice wavered. So that's it? You're turning your back on us forever? I held her gaze. No. I'm closing the door that should have stayed shut a long time ago. I walked to the front hall and opened the door. The morning sun spilled across the floor. She rose slowly, gathering her coat with deliberate, graceful movements. At the threshold, she paused. You think you've won? I don't need to win, I said. I just needed to stop losing myself to people who never saw me. She hesitated, her eyes scanning mine for one final thread to pull. When she found none, she stepped outside. Just before I closed the door, I added the last nail in the coffin. "If you ever need someone to clean up what's left," I said, voice calm, "call a professional. I know a great one. He owns the company." Her face tightened, and then the door closed. On her. On them. On the past. I locked it, exhaled, and turned toward the silence that, for the first time, felt like peace.